Hi, everyone. I'm going to wait for a couple more people to join, and then we'll get started with today's webinar. Well, let's get started. So, hello, everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar of tying data from multiple columns into a string. I'm all sure that you're aware by now that my name's Milo, and I'm part of the support team. And today I'm going to be going through how you can transform data from multiple columns into a string within Workbooks reports. To do this, we'll be using the concatenation function, or concat for short. As you all are aware, we're currently doing a series of webinars every other Wednesday at 4 p.m. UK time. And on the screen, you can see where we started our journey and what we have planned for the next couple. It's good to also remember that we also do have a 2-day training course on reporting where we do go into some topics in a bit more depth. For information about these, you can always contact your account manager or email training@workbooks.com. With that said, let's go over what I'll be covering today. So to start with, I'm going to be going over what concatenation is and how it can be used. From there, I'll show you how to build concatenation formulae, and then onto what's known as a group concatenation formula, and finally showing you how to build all of these within Workbooks. As ever, there will be a time for questions towards the end of the webinar. So, what is concatenation? Concatenation allows you to link values together in a series or a string. There are a couple different concat formulae that can be used, and I'll be going over them and how you can determine which one you actually want to use. The first formula that I'm going to show you can be used with an example where you have separate fields on a record to capture people's addresses. On the screen, you can see that there are fields for street address, town, and country, and using a concat formula, this will allow you to display all of these values for these fields as a string, as you can see within the last column. The way that you would actually first put your concatenation formula together is first you would write concat and open your brackets. Next, you would need to put in the first value that you want in your string and then add a comma. After the comma, you would need to add what is known as a separator within quotation marks. For the example on the screen, I've simply put a space, but you can always use something like a comma or a dash or a hyphen. You can even have multiple separators together within your quotation marks. But once you've got your separator in the quotations, always make sure to add another comma. After that, we would look into putting the second value that we want to put in our string. And then we would simply close our brackets. And that is a concat statement. Now, obviously, when you are building these, you can have more values. You're not tied to just two. And it's also good to know that when you're building this together, you can have different separators between each of the values. So for example, between the first and the second, I could simply have a space, but between a second and third, I could have a hyphen. Well, now that you've actually seen what the formula looks like, if I go back to the example I had earlier about the addresses, the formula that I would use for this would look like this. As you can see, I've got 3 values in here, and actually for my separator, I have both a comma and a space, just making sure that they're all within the quotation marks. There is something that you always need to watch out for when using that concat formula. On the screen, we have columns for people's first, middle, and last names, along with a concat formula to bring them together. You can see that this formula has worked for John, who does have a middle name, and for Sarah, who doesn't have one. However, it's not worked for James, who also doesn't have a middle name. The reason for this is that Sarah's middle name is empty or blank. This means that the database knows that it's empty and has a string value of 0. With James, the value for his middle name is what we call null, meaning that there is an absence of data. And this can be tricky to understand when looking at records, as a blank value and a null value can appear the same. But it is important to remember that this concat formula does work with blanks, but it doesn't work with nulls. So if we used it, it doesn't work, as we can see. But there is another variation of the concat that we can use. And this variation is what we call concat_ws, or concatenate with separator. And this treats null values as an empty string. The way that we would look into building this is first, we would add concat_ws, open our brackets, and then in quotes, we would add the separator that we want between each of the values. Like before, this could be a space, a comma, or a combination. But after the quotes, you would add a comma, and then you would start adding all of the values that you want to concatenate together with a comma between them. And finally, you would close your brackets. When we use the formula, we actually get the following. And it's good to know that while using this statement, null values will still give you an output, even though you can only use the same separator compared to the first formula where you could have multiple different ones. Now, both the concat and the concat_ws are great when you want to turn values from different columns into a string. But what would you do if you wanted all the values concatenated together from the same column? So, for example, you have a report that looks at all of the campaigns that a person is part of. And on the screen, you can see that I've got a screenshot of a details view of a report that shows all of them. But what I can do is if I use a different formula, what we call a group concat, we can actually transform the data from what you can see now into something like this, where we have all of those campaign values all in the same row and all tied as a string. Now, it's good to always remember that this group concat formula can only be used in a summary view. You can't do this within a details view of your report. But the way that we would actually write this group concat formula is we would put group_concat with a bracket. Then we would select the column from the view the summary is looking at that you want to string together, and then you would close your brackets. So using the campaign as an example, it would be looking at the campaign name. So my formula would look like this. Notice how when referring to a column in another view, it doesn't use the field name like it does in the details view. It uses the column name in brackets where it's got the parent beforehand. Now, I've shown you the different concat functions and how they work, but I think now let me jump into Workbooks and actually show you how to build these. So on the screen, you can see that I've got a report here. This report is looking at organizations, and because I have a lot of organizations here, I've added a couple of criteria just to limit the number of results. But using this formula, I've had one of the managers come over to me, and they've asked if they can get all of the addresses for these organizations, but they're wanting to actually wanting the addresses all in one line. The reason for this is they have some sample products that they want to send all of these customers, and they want to be able to just get all of the addresses all in one line so that it can be used for forwarding it. So what they've actually asked is how can we actually get all of the addresses where the street address and the town are on one line, the county/state and the post and zip codes are on another line, and then the country is on a line of its own. So in order to do this, I would need to first add a calculated column. So let me do that. And I'm going to just call it full address. Oh, pardon my spelling. Now, obviously, now I need to start writing my formula. You can just start typing in the formula that you want, or alternatively, I'm going to use the function button down here. Now, in our previous webinars, we've talked about if and case functions, and these are known as conditional functions. The concat function is actually known as a string function. And then you can see that we've got an option that says concatenation functions. When I select this, I have concat and concat underscore WS. I'm going to choose concat, and we can see that that's now added in the formula here. So what I need to start doing is adding all of my columns. So let's start with street address. Make sure I add a comma. I then put in my quotation marks, and I'm, for my separator, going to go comma, space, close my quotation marks, and add another comma. I'm next going to add in the next value that I'm looking for, which is the town. Put in another comma. And for this separator, because I was asked to put it on a new line, I'm going to use a function of /n and close my quotation marks. This is a simple way that you can actually get the data to recognize that it's a new line that needs to be started. Now that I've got my town in there, I next need to add my county or state. Put in my comma, and again, my separator. Then I want the postcode or zip code. Add my comma, add the quotations, and do the new line. And then finally, I would want to put the country. Now, I've got all the values that I want to look in here, so I'm going to close my brackets, save and close this calculated column, and I'm going to run my report. And what you can see is that I have the new column of full address where it started to, well, where it has concatenated all of the values for the other ones. Now, within Workbooks, you can't see that a new line has been added, but if I was to export my report and just open that quickly, apologies for this, just making sure that I open up the right one. Now, I've exported my report, and as you can see, when I expand the full address, you can see that when it's been exported, it has put all of those in onto a new line. But one thing you may also notice while looking at the full address one is I've got a couple of ones that are blank. And this is because the county or state column has a null value. So now that I've noticed this, I've obviously gone back to the manager and explained the situation and said that when putting it in the way that he wants, some of the addresses won't appear because we have some null values. And they've come back and said, okay, well, having it on a separate line is good. We want to make sure that we get all of the addresses in there so that we've got something so they're happy that I have it all on one line. So to do this, obviously I'd go back in, edit my report. And normally if I was to do this, I would just go in and I would edit the details of this formula so that it shows there. But I want to show you guys what it looks like side by side. So I'm actually going to add a new calculated column, give it a title of, full address 2. And now I'm going to start to build the formula. So like before, I want to go to my string functions. I want to pick concatenation functions. And this time I'm going to pick concat underscore WS. So we have our formula in there. And if you remember, first we need to put our separator. So I open my quotations. I'm going to put a comma and a space for this one and close it. Add my comma. And now I can start putting in the columns that I want. So let me start to do that. And also, just like before, whenever we are adding a new column or value that we want to look at, we do need to make sure that we put the comma after each one. So let me just finish this. And just put in country finally. And just like before, now that I've got all my values, I'd make sure that I close my brackets for there. So I'm going to save and close this, and I'm going to run my report. Now, as we can see, when we compare both full address 2 and the full address, those values that previously didn't have an output now do. And that's because we've used the concat with separator, which does handle null values. So that's both the concat and the concat with separator formula. Let's have a look now at the group concat formula. So I have another report here, and I've had the marketing manager come up to me, and she's asked me that she wants a report to show how many campaigns each person has joined, along with the names of all of those campaigns. However, they want to see the names of the campaigns on one row rather than multiple. So the report that I have here is a report that's based on people, where to start with, I'm just showing their name, the person reference, so we can use it as a unique identifier. And I've also done a drill through so I can get the campaign name that they're part of. So in order to use the group concat function, if I was to add a calculated column here, you may have also picked this up earlier, that if I go to my functions, my string functions and concatenation ones, I don't have an option that says group concat. So what I need to do is first build a summary view. And as you always remember, with summary views, we always need to add a grouping column. I'm going to put this as the person reference. And I'm also going to just add a column just so I can also show the person name. And here we have the start of our report. But as I said, we need to look into getting all of those campaign names onto the same row. So what I would first do is add a calculated column, give it a title as ever, and start building my formula. So if I now go add a function, I have my string functions, my concatenation, and you can now see group concat has appeared. So if I select that, I would now need to I would now need to add the column that I want to concatenate. Now I remember that it was campaign name. So when I select that, we've got it automatically populated. I make sure I close my brackets and I can save and close that. So when I quickly refresh it, I'll bring this over for you. But you can see that now all of those campaigns have been put together on one row as a string value. Now, the marketing manager did also ask for a count of how many campaigns they had. So obviously what I would do for this one is add another value column where I'd want a summarized column where I'm looking at the campaign names and make sure that I'm calculating a count. And for the title, I'm going to put number of campaigns. So when I save and close this, and if I run my report, what we can see here is I've got my list of campaigns and I've got a count of how many campaigns that they have joined. Now, obviously, I would do a little bit of playing with this so that it's not as messy, but these are the steps that we'll go for how to do it. But that's it. That is the group concat. So, having gone through that, let's recap. So the concatenation function lets you take information from different points in your report and link them together in a string. Both the concat and the concat with separator functions can take values from different columns and join them together. The group concat allows you to can look at a different view and take values from different rows and link them together. But this is a formula that cannot be used within the details view of a report. So let's see if we've got any questions. So I've got one. So I've got a question here. Can you advise on unconcatenation of addresses when exported into Excel come back into one field? Caroline, I believe what you're asking is if you export a report where you've got all of the columns with the addresses, how you want to get that into one field, I believe, one cell within a report within Excel, correct? Unfortunately, the method eludes me. I do apologize, but I'll definitely look into that and come back to you and let you know for that one. Let's see, do we have any other questions pop up? Okay, I've got one here that says, how can you tell if a value is blank or null with there? Um, so, um, if you let me just pop back into Workbooks. So the question of how can you tell if a cell is blank or null? I've gone back to my first report, which is taking all of the addresses. Um, as you may remember, we did have some of the fields in the county or state. What we can do is if we want to identify whether it's blank or null is, let me just add a title to this. For the functions, under the conditional functions, we have an option of if null, where what this would do is we could then select our column. So I'm going to just pick the state, and I would then add a comma and put in a value that I want it to come out as. So for this, I'm going to put quotes and put null, and then close my brackets. Sorry, just getting that right. And when I save and close that, if I bring it over, what you will see happens is when it doesn't have a value, when it is null, it brings back a value of null. And if it is blank, it will just return whatever in there. So it's a good way to quickly identify that. And bear with me. So Caroline, just to go back to your question of advise on unconcatenated addresses for that one coming into Workbooks. If you do concatenate it within Workbooks and you export it, if you do concatenate it within Workbooks and export it, it will show as concatenated in there. If you're talking about bringing in information from an Excel sheet into Workbooks, you would need to do a few calculations within Excel for that one. But what you can do is certainly when you've got that done, you'd be looking at how to do the import for that. So when you export out of Workbooks, the whole street address shows in one. Can we not break that down before the export? Um, yes, that is something that you can actually do. So Caroline has said that what she means is when exported out of Workbooks, the whole street address shows in one cell. Is there a way, can we not break that down before the export? Yes, Caroline, that is something that you can do. You would be using a couple different methods for that. And it's something that I'll reach out to you after this webinar and go through. And I've also had another question, which goes, what causes null versus blank? So, if I understand your question correctly, Rachel, you've said what causes null and what causes a blank. Null means that when the information comes into Workbooks, this could be via an import that no value has actually been added. It's simply like asking a question of, do you like rugby? That the answer could be yes, the answer could be no, or you could have a null value, which means that the question was never asked. The null means that that value was never brought in, so Workbooks doesn't know what the answer is. If it is blank, it means that it was asked, and it just means that there is no value in there. And I believe that is it. So following on from that, since we've got no more questions, just to let you know, our next webinar, which will be on the 25th of June, will be on mastering your charts. So transferring raw numbers into compelling charts. But till then, if you guys do need help, feel free to use our knowledge base, which can be found. Alternatively, if you are an authorized support contact, you can reach out to us on support either by email, telephone, or using the case portal. Alternatively, you can also reach out to your account manager. We do also have more videos on different topics that can be found on our website. And all of the recordings for this webinar and also our previous webinars can also be found on our website by going to the resource page and then selecting webinar recordings. But I want to thank everyone for joining today, and I look forward to seeing you on the next one.